I would love to talk about, well, I can just, from personal experience, that was a really useful path for me back to a steady practice of self-compassion, because I have to tell you, when I first did Kristen Neff's self-compassion scale, I did not do well on that test.
Yeah, me too.
And you know, this is just such a great way of just being just a little bit kinder and softer to ourselves. And how has compassion impacted your work in terms of healthcare, whether we're talking about people in pain, people after trauma? And I'm particularly fond of using this with people who've been through a cancer journey, because for a lot of the women that I've worked with, whether it's breast cancer or gynae cancer, they're in this elevated state of threat and awareness all the time, because every twinge, every ache and pain, is it the cancer back again? And so they're in this kind of, you know, sometimes low level, sometimes quite high level, fight or flight, but they're trying to get away from themselves because they have this sense of betrayal about their own bodies and some anger with that. And to be able to bring, you know, that, again, it's something that I've used a lot in my work, is to bring that sense of compassion, kindness, and awareness to that situation, has provided so many women with such an emotional release as well, and that ability to come home to themselves. And again, it's a lovely gift. So could we talk just a little bit about what is compassion, and then what sparked your desire to bring more awareness to compassion in the world?
Oh, wow. Those are, yeah. Okay, let's see. So compassion, do you want me to outline self-compassion more specifically, or I can speak to compassion and how?
I think go wherever it leads you.
Okay. So, well, let's just put it all into context. So the umbrella of compassion, let's just talk about compassion in general. So there's no one agreed upon definition, like there's different descriptions. And so the one definition that they use in the Oxford Handbook of Compassion Science, so it's this fabulous compendium, I guess, or is that what you would call it? It's a handbook, basically. All the, you know, the best compassion researchers around the world, they come together. It's a great book. And the working definition they use for compassion for that book is you have to first recognize that someone is suffering, and that could be yourself as well. So recognizing the struggle or the suffering with the motivation to want to alleviate it. So that's one kind of description, and some of the others are similar, but then some of the others add a motivation and or an action. So there's more behavioral component. So that definition falls a bit short, right? It's more just, okay, you are aware, you have that awareness component, you have the intention and the motivation, you want to alleviate, but compassion, there's an action there, you know, is what they're saying in the literature. And that makes sense to me as well. Like, it's not just an emotion, right? It's a behavior. So that just gives you, you know, a little bit. And then we can say, well, okay, but then like, what is it though, really? Like, what does it look like? And that's a longer conversation, which I'm happy to get into, but I'll just start short. And then if you want to expand on it, I can. But I get carried away with this one because I get so excited. But still sticking with that compassion sort of piece, we haven't really got to the self-compassion part specifically, but this compassion piece, I love Joan Halifax's model of an active compassion. So that's what I outlined in the textbook, and then I outlined how yoga aligns with it, and all, like, perfectly, and the different practices and philosophy from yoga. But just really briefly, just in case, you know, people are wondering, well, how does it look? Because often we think compassion is just being kind, and it's so much more nuanced than that. You know, it's more of this process. And there's these, in Halifax's model, there's like many different domains. It's not necessarily stages, it's just components or ingredients that helps to prime for a compassionate wisdom to emerge from the context of that situation. So there's no canned response for compassion. It's like wisdom. If you were to try to describe, well, what's wisdom? Well, it's not one thing, you know, it's not like if you are working with someone, you know, that you can't say that when they start crying, the compassionate response is this, you know, to go get them the tissue. And well, it depends. It depends on the content, many things. If that tissue is in another room, you're not going to just walk up and go walk for 2 minutes and then come back. And, you know, and that's a simple kind of obvious example, but it can get more nuanced where we have examples where we think we don't really know what the most compassionate thing is. You know, and that's where you prime for the, so what do those what are those ingredients? And I am going to go through them. We have time. It won't take long, but is that okay? Because I can't stop. Okay. So, and I'll try to keep it brief and not go into too detailed. But if you're wondering, okay, well, how do we do that then? How do we be more compassionate? And there's a lot of different compassion training programs, and there's a lot of different ways. But this is one of my favorites, and a lot of the programs do include these ingredients. Like they're similar, right? So the first one, like intention, like you have to have the intention. So there's lots of different ways that you could do that. One is just a little, I'm here to serve. I'm here to serve. And I'm here to take care of myself first and the person, you know, that I'm with. And so just having that intention. And then attention, so presence. And again, we have so much science, you know, that supports this, that being present and not thinking of stories or, you know, the past, the future, you're just present. That's going to increase your chances that your compassionate response is going to, you know, be truly compassionate. It kind of makes sense, right? And there's ways you can help to improve your attention. So that's another conversation. And then there's also this domain of like the emotions, or they call it, Halifax calls it the affective domain, but it's this idea that you are aware of also your own emotions, and then you try to regulate them, and you try to prime for kind, positive, kind of social, affiliative type of emotions, right? And that just makes sense. If you're anxious or angry or jealous, contemptuous, you know, if you've got these kind of emotions, like that's not going to prime as much for a compassionate response. So this is common sense, but then it's like, well, how do you do that? It's easy. I always, you know what I say, Michelle, it's easy when it's easy. I can be compassionate with, I'm in a safe with you right now, and I'm safe, and some of my favorite people, or even a stranger, but they're no threat to me. It's kind, like that's easy. But when it's hard, it's hard. And all we have to do is think of times right now, you know, where we're not agreeing with people, and just it's hard when it's hard. Okay, so that's the intention, the attention, the emotional regulation. And then there's also the insight. So this is by cultivating these domains that I've just talked about, it helps provide more insight into the suffering, whether it's your own or the person you're working with. And some people call this cognitive empathy or clinical empathy. And that's a whole other conversation. And they've kind of used that emotional empathy and changed it to like it's more cognitive. But basically, insight is just you have a deeper understanding of the person's story. And how do you do that? Well, like I said, just by priming those first three: attention, listening, creating a safe space, not rushing in to fix. So exactly what you talked about, this idea of, and Porges talks about this, Stephen Porges in his work. But when we rush in to fix, even though it's very well intended, but when we do that, the person's physiology, they can go into a state of physiological defense because they're not having the space to be seen and heard. So it's really fascinating. Sometimes the most compassionate thing we can do is to do nothing and to sit back and create safe space. And then the last two are embodied and engaged. So the embodied domain is, this is really important, and I love this work. And this is the idea that the embodiment is this felt sense of being in your being. So it's just this felt sense of where you are right now, being in your body, mind, and in the environment. And so to heighten or to optimize the most compassionate response, this ingredient helps if you can just imagine this, because you are dividing your attention. So you have to be aware of what's going on with you. You have to be present. Know, is your breath, and so if someone says something, or or your patient maybe is telling you a story, and then they say something maybe in the next few sentences that totally contradicted the first one, and then you feel tense, or you start to judge, and you start to be like, is this person lying? And then you're telling stories, and you got to know, you got to stay present and what's going on with you. And when you feel maybe the physical tension, or you notice your thought is telling a story, that embodiment piece is the idea that you have to not only just pay attention to your own self, but at the same time listen and pay full attention to the person. So you have to divide your attention. And that's a skill we develop, and we can practice that, and of course through different yoga practices and other things. And then the engagement one, the last one, that's in compassion in action. Yeah. And like I said, that could be doing something, giving advice, or going to get the tissue, or doing nothing, creating space. I mean, there's all kinds of things. And then the self-compassion. So compassion is not compassion unless it includes yourself. So that's what, people sometimes get confused, because they think you can have too much compassion, and this idea of compassion fatigue. And there's different, people have different, in the literature, different ideas about that. But there's one strong, what's the word I'm looking for? Opinion, I guess, or concept that they talk about in this Oxford Handbook of Compassion Science and other areas, is this idea that compassion fatigue, you can't, if it's truly what we're talking about compassion, you can't really get that. Like, that's like saying you have wisdom fatigue, because compassion is like, if you just remember what I just said there, and then it includes yourself, and it includes boundaries. And so if you feel truly, and if you're listening to me right now and you're like, well, that's not true, like I know I have compassion fatigue, well, what we say to that is, well, you're fatigued, absolutely, you're burnt out, you're tired, yes, but it's a little more, if you can understand, like, it's a little more nuanced. It's not from having too much compassion. It could be that maybe you don't have that compassion towards yourself, so you're not setting the boundaries, or that you have what they're terming as empathic distress, so that the emotional toll that this is taking on you, and you don't have that emotional regulation or resiliency and so forth. So that's a different thing, and that's getting into semantics, I guess, too. But so yeah, and then the self-compassion is Neff's, like the mindfulness. So you have to first be aware that you're in a really tough struggle. And then the common humanity piece, which is you're not alone. That seems to be really important in the literature. Just the more isolated we feel, we can be harder on ourselves. And then the self-kindness piece. So then you do something to soothe you, and it could be removing yourself from the situation, or a little gesture, or a little phrase that you repeat, and so forth. So that was a lot, thank you, I hope. But just to summarize, you have this compassion umbrella. It's a process. You have all of these ingredients and these things you can do to prime for compassion wisdom in that context, and it includes self-compassion with those three components.
And it kind of has to start, doesn't it, really, with self-compassion? Because
I think so.
You have to fill your own cup first, and to be compassionate to yourself means having boundaries. I love Brene Brown's thoughts about this. Boundaries are kindnesses. And I think just to have that clarity, but also it's just the basic laws of physics as well. You have to have energy coming in. It can't just be energy going out the whole time. And again, what I love about Halifax's work is how contextual it is, that there isn't a recipe. This is what you say to be compassionate. And to give people the space for themselves to kind of shine a light on that. What would self-compassion look like to you? How could you, how can you take yourself one step further in the journey? Again, old physio mindset coming in as the fixer, but maybe again just saying, okay, so let's go through those steps and let's hold space for each other, but you're not the mechanic with all of this. And I think that's sometimes where this concept of compassion fatigue comes from, because we get confused about what compassion really is, and it's not fixing people.
Right. Well said.
The only person we can fix ourselves.
And the value of you know, compassion and self-compassion, which I outlined too, the benefits. I mean, it's the obvious ones, right? Like, well, it's just a good thing to do. and as far as offering a compassionate space and compassionate responses, I mean, that's going to improve your therapeutic alliance and even patient outcomes and things like that. But it also helps you yourself as the healthcare provider. They've shown that we have some studies now, like with our own physical and mental health, and actually reduce burnout. And that's kind of contrary to some of the thoughts out there, you know. And again, I think, like you said, it's because we confuse what compassion really is, and we don't include those boundaries in self-compassion. And then as far as self-compassion, I think you had asked too at the beginning there of this portion, you know, just the value, you know, and how has it helped people that I work with and myself and that. And I just, you know, there's what the literature says, and then there's in my experience what I've seen, and they do match, you know. And it's just this idea that when we do have more self-compassion, we're coming from a place from, you know, really genuine care and love for ourselves. So what tends to happen, and what the research is showing, and what I've seen in my own self, and maybe you've seen this too, with your self-compassion practicing, and what I've seen with others, and the research is showing this, when we come from a place of self-compassion, genuine care and concern for ourselves, we then tend to try new things, or we do better when we do fail. Like if we fail or make a mistake, or we do something we're not proud of, or we feel shameful, it's an antidote to shame. So we actually feel, or from that, what it shows is that we engage in more healthy behaviors. We actually do take, I hate to say better care, I always try to think of a different term, but we start to take actions and we make choices that are in line with our values. We do that more when we're self-compassionate, not less. Like some people think self-compassion is that self-indulgent, and well, if I was self-compassionate, I would just eat ice cream all day and sit on the couch. Well, if you're truly self-compassionate, I mean, you would actually do that, because I really like ice cream and sitting on the couch. So that's a whole other conversation. There's a place for that. Yeah, so I would do that, and I wouldn't feel guilty about it. And if I did that for every single day, slept until 2 p.m. and had ice cream, well, what would happen is over time, you know, you start to feel you're forgiving of yourself, and you're coming from this place of genuine care and concern, like I said. And then from there, you're more likely to change your behavior. That's what the science is telling us, and that's my own experience and people I work with. So the whole babbling there was self-compassion has been shown to increase our choices, or healthy behavior choices. Yeah. So that's really interesting. And then even just, you know, reducing anxiety, reducing fear, helping with depression, research has shown that, and improving emotional resiliency, just overall health and well-being and quality of life are some of the measurements. So like we got to watch not to make these big grand claims that, you know, we just have to do these little self-compassion practices. Like that's not what we ever say about anything, but it is interesting that we're starting to research this and the value that it has. And then for the people I work with, I think I'm just trying to think of a few, kind of in a similar vein. I'm looking up because I'm trying to envision some people and what I could share. I think just this softness that I see, that, and it just shifts, right? Even their whole, the way they move, even, because there's a softness, there's not this rigidity in this, because so for so many years they've been, as we all have been, I think it's part of our culture and how we're raised, even, is just, we had this idea that self-criticism is what's going to help us achieve our goals. Self-criticism, and we want to be better, and we want to grow, and we, you know, and how are we going to do that unless we, you know, are critical, and we're starting to see, well, no, this softer self-compassion will help you grow and do what you need to do. And so what I see with people, yeah, is an overall peace and softness and ease, and then that reflects on their movement and their tone of voice, and just, you know, and then their pain and their relationship to their pain, their relationship to themselves. I loved what you said. The last thing I want to say here is I loved what you said about coming home to yourself, and that's it. I mean, that is, I think, really profound, and I would say that's what I see, I've experienced myself, and what other people have said in not so many words. One, there is a quote I have that I shared in a webinar not too long ago. A patient had said, and it was just, it wasn't with self-compassion, but it was just in general how yoga has helped them on their pain journey. And it was, I feel like myself again. I feel like I got me back.
Oh.
I feel like I got me back.
Mm.
So that's like what you're saying. And someone once told me, a yoga teacher had said, yoga is remembering. Remembering.
That just that resonates, doesn't it?
Yeah, remembering. And it does. I hear that. And that's all I need is that word, and even just my hands on my heart. And if anyone wants to do that, like, just remember. Remember. And that, of course, that's remember you're you know, regardless of your age, any identity, right? Regardless of your age, your job status, your financial status, your gender, like your relationships, just remember. Yeah, that's self-compassion practices really seem to accentuate that feeling of coming home, like you said.
And I think, you know, this has such application, I'm going to say, particularly for physios, because I think, you know, for a lot of us, we've been trained to want to elicit behavior change. And behavior change is hard. You know, I mean, how many times have we asked patients, so how many glasses of water did you drink today? And everybody's like, oh, I know I didn't drink enough. Or did you do your exercises? No, I didn't. And it just sets up this defensive hardening, instead of maybe taking some of the knowledge, you know, and the research around maybe motivational interviewing and self-efficacy. But I think unless that's coming from a place of kindness, of remembering your why, you know, you're not doing this to please your physio. You know, you're doing this to take better care of yourself. And I think if physios could let go of the responsibility of changing other people, and just maybe just soften a little bit, and just teach people, again, just about that, just tuning in, then behavior change is much easier when you can remember why you want to change a behavior, instead of somebody telling you that you should change it or you have to.
Absolutely. Beautiful. Yeah, that's one thing I wish we took in school, in physio school. I think it's so important, is we need a class, a whole course on how to facilitate, guide, you know, the people we work with, how to guide our patients, you know, towards behavior change, or towards, you know, whatever words we want to use. And even our language is so interesting, isn't it? Like we talk about patient compliance or patient adherence, and even that's a little harsh and rigid, right? It's like they're, you know, they have to comply or they have to adhere to, and it's like, it's almost, it's just concept, right?
Yeah.
Of can we even just shift our language to,
and the power differential.
Yep.
You know, instead of it being a collaborative, it is very much this, it can be this kind of a dynamic.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We want to co-create. We want to, the buzzwords, right, of shared decision making, and those are beautiful words, but that it's like, hey, how are we really embodying that? And that takes a shift in how we were trained. And like I said, it's easy to intellectually understand shared decision making and co-creating the plan and co-creating the implementation, but then it's like, okay, what does that really mean? And yeah, but I really like, I really love how you're talking about, you've mentioned it a few times, about the fix it mentality. And that paradigm is, as you read in the book, is it's woven throughout, where yoga therapy is really about the salutogenic model, or salutogenesis. Is just helping people create, their own health and well-being, and not us going in to look at, assessing all the things that are, that need to be fixed. Like, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, and here's what
here's how
even yeah, well, and even yeah, so there's two things here. So even here's how I'm going to fix it, but also I see a shift in a positive direction, but also the shift that, okay, I'm not going to fix you, but here's what I'm going to do still, so that you fix yourself. Like, it's still, you know what I'm saying? It's still not quite. So so we really have to change that mentality of the, we're holding space, and we're the facilitator, and we're dancing, we're it's a dance a lot. I look at it, and yeah, it's, and I just want to add one other thing that came to mind when you were talking about, behavior change, and how that's just so key. Is that not the part of the foundation of our working with people, wouldn't you say, Michelle? Like, is that behavior change? Like, yeah, it's so key. So I wish in school we had more education on the psychology, behavioral psychology, social psychology around that. But the one thing I wanted to say, and maybe you remember this in the book, I talk about it, but there's that study, Armin and Hawk study, I think it was in 2016 or something. And they had 10 women, and it was a 1-year long study. So it was in an integrative rehab hospital. I think it was done in Sweden. And that was the aim, was how can we help these women who have been struggling with self-care, who have been struggling with making healthy choices for, so long. These women had chronic persistent pain for many years. And so it was 1 year long. And the idea was to see if providing more compassionate care, doing that first, like they just wanted to see. And it wasn't until the women received unconditional, compassionate, loving care for an extended period of time, then they started to change their behavior. And it was a qualitative study. And so the women were saying things like, I feel worthy of care. So they feel worthy now. Whole was the words they used. Complete. Loved. They said they felt loved. And so sometimes, yes, you were talking about self-compassion and how can you, but sometimes with the people we work with, and I would say maybe more often than we know, they just know, they need to know what it feels like to be loved and worthy, maybe from us, and then they can take those steps a little bit easier. So yeah, I just wanted to add that. It's another orientation that's kind of interesting.
And again, as opposed to scolding somebody like a naughty child for not doing their exercises, because I think that's so. And you know what, I'm going to, because I've done it. I have done it, and it's just, again, does it become then a power struggle? But because I think if you bring that awareness of, you don't know what that person's journey has been, and that's such a powerful study that you cited there, you know, in terms of adverse childhood events. But you know, we know the stats, even, you know, globally, are somewhere between 1 in 3 and 1 in 4 women will have experienced some sort of sexual violence. And to start giving people back autonomy and self-efficacy and empowerment to make better choices for themselves and help them fill their own toolboxes, with the knowledge that they deserve to be loved, they are worthy of love, and they also deserve to take care of themselves, and to make that a priority. I think, as you said, I would love to see this included on the curriculum, probably more so than upslips and downslips and inflares and outflares. I think this is far more important work, particularly in the world of persistent pain.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Behavior change, and, you know, making certain choices, like I said, in line with your values. I mean, that's complex. I mean, if we knew the process on how to do that, I mean, the world would be different place. Like, it's complex, and but we can at least shed some more light into that and be better as clinicians, you know, on how do we help. And I love what you said about, you know, if people aren't, I'll use the word, complying or adhering, you know, to the program, and we feel like we've done everything we can. Like, I've really shifted with that, Michelle, like that attitude of just, you know, we don't wake up in the morning and say, okay, how can I be, you know, how can I be the worst person I can today? Or how can I not do all the things I'm supposed to today? Or how can I not comply with my exercise program today? Like, we just don't do that. And we want to, but for those that we work with who just aren't, and this is where the compassion comes in. So, and I invite everybody who's listening, and then for you and I too, like, just think of, you know, just bring someone up in your mind. Think of someone you're working with who, you know, who maybe you really are having a hard time understanding. You know, you've done everything that you can, and you've been compassionate, and you've tried everything, and you've made sure that the goals are valued by the person. You've made sure that, and the goals were obviously co-created, but they're valued so that everything you're doing is in line with the person's values. So first of all, if we haven't done that, then that could be a reason, you know, these exercise and all that. It's like, they don't really value that. There's other things. Anyways, that's another conversation. But let's say you've done it, you've done that. They have value-based goals. You've given them, you know, all the support that they need, all the different ways maybe that could help them adhere to the exercises or to the program, whatever it may be, and they just keep falling off the wagon, so to speak, or maybe they never get on it or whatever. And curiosity, like, it's just that idea of showing up. And I think a lot of people, they have a hard time showing up for themselves, so at least we can just show up for them, and just keep trying, and just don't give up, and find the barriers. You know, what is it, you know, and maybe they don't know, and heck, it could be social stuff. Maybe they're just trying to work on food security, or like, we have no idea. And you know what, last thing I'll say on this, I think the last thing I'll say about this, one thing I contemplate on, and maybe others would like to try this, is I reflect on the idea that if I was that person, so not if I were them, like being me in their shoes, but like if I were them. Does that make sense? Like, if I were, because we always say, well, if I was in their shoes, I would do. It's like, well, no, you're being you. No. If you were truly them. So I'm like, if I was really that person, I would make the exact same choices. And I do that with everybody, even people that maybe, you know what I'm saying? That, and yeah, so I like that little thought experiment. And the reason why we would do exactly that, it's because the context of every moment, every past influence, everything,
All those beliefs. It just
beliefs, yeah, personality, how their brain is wired, neurodiversity, relationship, like it's just so complex. So what do? We just keep trying as a clinician, as a physiotherapist. We keep trying. We keep holding space.
Yeah.
And then maybe the goals, yeah, and maybe the goals that we have set, maybe they need to change, or maybe the outcome of our time together with that person, maybe it's not what we thought it was. That I surrender a lot. That's kind of a yoga philosophy too, to the process. So maybe the goals we set, and maybe they are patient valued and they have been co-created with the patient, but maybe, maybe our time together was meant for something else that we haven't really discovered. And maybe it was for planting seeds for the person in their future. They'll remember a little something we said, or maybe it was just to provide them some peace in that 6 months.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a yoga. We talk about that in the book a bit too. But
it's like Ram Dass says, we're all just walking each other home.
Right. Oh gosh, you have these beautiful. We're all just walking each other home. I love that.
And I think just to remember that, and just to keep a little bit of softness in your heart, that's the key, isn't it? And again, instead of this, remember, that's what it's all about.
Yeah.